Thank you.
We're good to go.
All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a special meeting of the Zoning Hearing Board for the City of Reading. This meeting has been rescheduled from October the 4th. Tonight is October the 25th. The hearing is about Appeal 2023-30 1400 Hill Road. Reading Hill LLC is seeking a special exception for adaptive reuse to establish 78 dwelling units, or in the alternative, seeks a change from one non-conforming use to another non-conforming use. It's also seeking a variance for the required square footage requirements for the dwelling units and variances for the number of required off-street parking spaces and drive aisles proposed for 1500 Eckert Avenue. Limit of one principal use per lot and any other relief required to support the project. The subject property is located in the R3 residential zoning district. I'm going to introduce the members of the board now. Charlie
Jones, alternate member of the board.
Tom
Fox, member of the board.
Jeff. You're muted, Jeff. All right, that's Jeff Gattone. Let's see, Bill Harsh.
Bill's audio isn't connecting, but he's on there.
Okay, and I'm Phil Rubino. I'm chairperson of the board. Steve
Price, solicitor to the board.
Okay.
Financial services company.
And Emily, excuse me, Emily.
Nationwide's there to protect, maybe.
1 second.
Excuse me, something's on here that shouldn't be on. All right, Emily, you introduce yourself.
Emily Diaz-Melenda, zoning office, and I believe Jared just got on as well.
And Jared, also a member of the board.
Jared Bartz, member of the board.
All right, thank you. Okay, Mr. Cook, you want to introduce yourself, and whomever you're going to have testify, we'll swear them in at this time. I would also like to tell anybody in the audience who wants to participate, please listen carefully to this. After each person testifies, if you have questions that you want to ask them about what they just testified to, we will recognize you in order and try to get to all the questions. At the time we ask for questions, we do not want to hear whether you like it or you don't like it. A question is a question, and I think you all know that. Later in the hearing, before the appeal is closed, you will have a time to go on the record either for or against the granting of the application. And we've got quite a few people that are listening in and whatever, so it might take a while to get to you. Just please be patient. Okay, I'm done, Mr. Cuck. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Mark Cuck on behalf of the applicant, Reading Hill LLC, 217 North 6th Street, Reading, PA 19601.
So let me put some exhibits into the record, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, please.
Exhibit number 6 is a letter from the managing director, William Heim, supporting the project. Exhibit number 7 is a letter from the mayor of the city of Reading supporting the project. Exhibit number 8 is a letter from Nathan Matz, the Reading Parking Authority executive director supporting the project. And exhibit number 9 is a letter that was produced, I guess, last month by city council objecting to the dimensional variance, but I don't believe it was objecting to the proposed apartments. I'd like to put some other things out on the record for people that are going to participate tonight. In order to ask questions or testify, you have to have standing. It means you have to be a neighbor. You can't live in Wernersville, say, and not own property next or close to this building and ask questions. So each person, as they're going to ask questions, we're going to determine whether they have standing. Also, when it comes to rendering opinions, whether you're for or against the application, if there's a number of residents who are for or against the application, we don't need to hear duplicative testimony. If the person before you stated what your objections or what you thought were positives about the project, all you have to do is state your name and your address and say, I would have testified as the prior residents. And that will protect you and keep you in participation of the hearing. Are there any questions?
No, sir.
Okay, we'll hand it over to you, Mr. Cook.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Ladies and gentlemen, initially, I would like to thank everybody on the board and all the staff who accommodated my last-minute request for a continuance earlier this month. I just want to say briefly, I appreciate that, and I apologize for any inconvenience to the board members and anybody else. So appreciate that. That being said, I would like to thank you all for the opportunity to again present on a special meeting night. I do believe this application has quite a bit of information related to it, as most of mine do. But this is, once again, if I may, just as a brief opening, a project for Heights Advisors. You've seen us several times in the past, and this particular application, ladies and gentlemen, is a very unique and I think actually a very exciting project for the city of Reading. It's not always, or every time that I present a hearing to you, that the property in question is so visible and so well known, but essentially we're talking about the 1400 Hill Road property, which you all know as the Central Catholic, the former Central Catholic High School. It is even prior to that, the Loudon Mansion, and it is an unbelievably amazing piece of property. My clients, Reading Hill LLC, acquired the property. And just as a brief background, Mr. Goldsman is here to testify with respect to what they have done and what they're proposing to do. But we also have Plato Marinakos, who is our architect with us. This property, as you probably well know, has been vacant for a significant period of time since approximately 2011. There's been a couple of owners in the meantime, and nobody's been able to get any significant traction or ability to develop this property or do anything with it. At the time that my clients took over, there was a significant amount of damage that was occurring. And had they not taken over when they did, perhaps the building might have been lost completely. To that point, we'll get into some testimony about what they did and what we're proposing to do. True to form, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Goldsman has prepared a presentation, which is a slideshow, which we'll bring up when we get him on here to testify. We'll walk you through what we're looking to do. But as you know from the application and from the staff report, which just for your edification has been slightly revised as of today, since the staff report that was issued to you on October 3rd or October 4th. And the proposal is 77 residential units in this very unique and very beautiful building. So with that being said, I think at this point, we can go ahead and swear Mr. Goldsman and Mr. Marinakos if they are both present, and we can move ahead with the testimony.
Ashley, go ahead.
Yes, can you both raise your right hands, please? I'm sorry, I just want to be able to see them if they could just say.
Hello, hi, it's Plato.
Okay. And your other witness, is he on?
Andrew's on as well, yes.
Okay, thank you. Do you both swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Good evening, Plato.
Good evening.
Ashley, I just got a text and members of the board from Andrew. He just got booted off the platform. He's signing back in. So if we could bear with me for just a second, please. The wonders of technology, right?
There's Andrew.
Mr. Goldsman, did you rejoin us?
Yes, I'm back. Sorry.
So Andrew, I don't know if you were able to be sworn, if you could, were you still on when that happened?
He needs to be sworn in.
Yes.
Sir, can you just raise your right hand, please?
Is he
One
on?
sec, I'm gonna relocate, but I could hear you guys.
Okay.
Okay, but we need to swear you in.
You having some connection issues?
Yeah, give me 1 second.
Mr. Cook,
Yes, sir.
since we're waiting a second, I mentioned a minute ago, you said 77 units. I think you meant 78. That's what
My apologies, you are correct.
okay, just double checking.
Sir, I'm
78 it
sorry.
is.
I don't have your name. It just says Galaxy. Can you tell me your name, please?
Who, me?
Yes.
Oh, Jeff Catone, member of the board.
Okay, thank you.
That should be better.
Okay, that is better. Can you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes,
Thank you.
Mr. Goldsman, good evening. How are you?
good. How are you?
Good, thank you. Mr. Goldsman, you've been through this a number of times with this board. I think most of the participants are familiar with you, but essentially, are you a co-manager of Reading Hill LLC for the application this evening?
Yes,
Would it be a fair statement that Reading Hill LLC is a related entity to Heights Advisors, which has done a number of projects in the Reading city?
yes,
All right. You've heard my opening statements about the Central Catholic property. Is Reading Hill LLC the owner of that property currently?
yes.
Would you be kind enough to get into a little bit of the background on what condition that property was in when you found it, please?
It looks like it may have frozen,
Yeah, he looks frozen.
Andrew, if you can hear us, if you, since you've been sworn in already, if you just wanted to turn off your camera, that usually helps.
It was, I don't know if you heard me, but it was not in great condition when we acquired it.
Are you comfortable moving ahead with video, or do you want to turn the video off, Andrew?
Might be when we're doing the slides, I'll turn it off just so I don't lose connection again, but I'll if I think Emily has the slides, if we could pull them up, and I'll just say next slide and we could go through it.
Yep.
So as she's doing that, obviously there was a significant amount of damage to the property when you acquired it. Is that fair?
Yeah, the former owners had let and this is not the church, it was the folks who acquired it after. They had let the roof drains go, which caused a extensive amount of water damage in the building. There was really almost every surface, especially in the mansion portion, was damp. Since then, since we acquired it and we're able to fix everything, it's watertight. We maintain it, as we would any other vacant building. We make sure that the lawn's cut a few times every single season, that, we dealt with some of the other maintenance issues we saw. The property has been subject to, significant vandalism, which we've had to deal with as well, as those issues come up.
It's been a challenge, to say the least. Is that right?
Yes, for sure.
Andrew, just for the board, can you tell them what attracted you to this property? What is it that drew your attention to this property?
So this is the first property we saw in Reading, predating any other project that we've spoken to the board about in the city. And I think we knew within 5 minutes of being inside of the building that it was something that we wanted to do. I mean, the reaction was that quick. At that point, it became figuring out whether or not it works. From a really broad perspective, it had its issues and it still does, but the building itself and the property attracted us where it was a motivation to work through those issues and figure out a reasonable and logical path forward. The passion that we developed and have for the building is definitely what guided us to push forward and figure out a lot of those problems. And I'm sure the problems that'll arise as we continue trying to redevelop the property.
Andrew, when you took a look at the zoning ordinance, we're in the R3 district. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
Can you, in your experience as a developer, see any other use that would make reasonable use of this particular property in that R3 district?
Probably not. And I mean, there's really a two-part answer to that question. So, you know, in terms of its existing non-conforming use as a school, you know, we were contacted by like the Antietam School District after they experienced their flooding, and you know, we had conversations about the state of the building, and you know, they declined to even visit because it didn't seem like it would be a good fit for them. You know, and a lot of that relates to how the facilities were maintained after the church had sold the property. So right after we bought the building, we reached out to Burke Central. We were able to meet the last principal at Central Catholic and her assistant, who then introduced us to the last maintenance folks who had been there, subsequently retired. And having walked those folks through the building to get their assessment of what the condition was when they sold the property and what the condition was now, I mean, they were choked up at some points given kind of what they saw on site. And, you know, the major utilities, I think, was the reason for Antietam alone not to look further, because, you know, the boilers hadn't been maintained per the old maintenance tech. They were already finicky in terms of not returning water all the time. And they had just been left in a state where they hadn't been run or maintained, that they're essentially, you know, trash at this point. So, you know, that deals with a non-conforming use. And in terms of new uses, I mean, there's the way that it's situated, we don't see another use for the property.
And that's a perfect segue, Andrew, into the tool that the city zoning ordinance has, which is the adaptive reuse provisions, which show up in the R3 district under 804 B4A, right? So an adaptive reuse is a special exception in the R3 district. And then that leads you into the 1202 adaptive reuse and the 1101.d. So let's go there. I mean, currently, as you stated, the property is a pre-existing nonconformity as it relates to the former use as a school. And so one of the options for relief is changing a pre-existing nonconforming use to another nonconforming use, right? Which is the residential nature of the proposed building.
Yes.
How many units are you proposing for the building?
78 currently.
And that's a clarification again for Mr. Gattone. I thank you for that, Mr. Gattone. And so the adaptive reuse actually appears to be the best vehicle from a special exception standpoint here. You want to go ahead and touch on the slideshow that you've prepared, please?
Sure. So we go the next slide. So just a broad summary as Mark stated. So, you know, for folks who haven't been in the building, and we had the opportunity to tour with some folks, and are more than welcome for some of our neighbors who are on here tonight to arrange for a time for you guys to see the property. You know, it's deceiving from the outside. It's quite large. It's almost 80,000 square feet of interior space, including the basement and attic area. And it's not a 5-minute walkthrough. It takes time to actually understand the different spaces. So when we acquired this building, we did not know how many units there would be in the property. We didn't really figure it out until we were done, you know, scanning and imaging the building. You know, we inherited it with no accurate current plans, whether it be floor plans, whether it be what's behind the walls, you know, for any portion of the property. So, you know, when we started, we used, you know, scanners to image the building, produce layouts. And from there, we started, you know, figuring out exactly what the highest and best use for the space would be. If we go to the next slide. So I want to go backwards quickly and then go forward, because I think that especially with some of the things we're going to touch on unit size, I think it's good to kind of see an example. You know, we spent, you know, there and Plato could speak to this when he speaks, because it makes us a difficult client, but we probably had 30 or 40 drafts of the plans here to get it right, in order to make sure that we're maximizing the space, not only from our perspective, but really from the perspective of the occupant. Is there a spot to put a sofa? Is there enough room in the kitchen for 2 people to maneuver? Questions like that are what we drill down in the design process. So 100 South 4th Street is our first project that we started here in Reading. We go to the next slide. We just recently finished a model unit. So this is 1 bedroom with a home office. The home office is a feature we're going to see, you know, in the plans for Hill Road. So in terms of zoning compliance, this probably this unit does not meet the zoning square footage required for a 1 bedroom. You know, it's something we would have received a variance on. We did for this project. But, you know, for folks, again, this is something that if neighbors were interested in touring, we'd be happy to do so. But folks from the city that we've had through the building, you know, I think we go to the next slide, you know, that I think our attention to detail and creating, you know, really nice, bright, open space, you know, makes the space feel much, much larger than it is. So, you know, the finishes that we brought here are not on par, and that they exceed, I think, the standard that you see in a lot of similar sized apartments in the city. You know, I'm talking about, you know, tile showers, you know, bathtubs, storage space in the bathrooms, you know, tile floors, you know, in terms of the kitchen. And, you know, we were lucky with 100 South 4th Street, similar to Central Catholic, that it was a beautiful building. So you could see kind of the you know, the heavy timber ceilings and, you know, the existing hardwood floors. I mean, it's a gift essentially to be able to be given that and not have to worry about trying to create something beautiful when you have kind of the skeleton to work with. So we refinished all the floors. We sanded down the timber ceilings and we retained those. And, you know, we were able to highlight the historic details of the property, you know, while making improvements and having a modern kitchen and having, you know, a nice office space that's configured, you know, in the lower right-hand corner with a desk and, you know, a guest bed, you know, sofa area. So so the space is livable, but someone could easily use this for more living space if they wanted it. If you go to the next slide. So, you know, there's a master bedroom. We replaced the windows. You don't really appreciate it in the pictures, but like, you know, a full-size person could essentially stand in the window space that you see there. You know, I think there's like almost 74 or 78 inches almost of space. So that was not something we expected to do. And instead of just leaving the old windows, when we discovered there were issues with some of them, you know, we made the decision to make the investment to install all new windows. The windows were manufactured here in Berks County in Morgantown with a company that we've worked with. You know, we wanted something quality, local, given kind of our attention to maintaining the original details in the unit and the building. So you could see, you know, in the upper right-hand corner, kind of the bathroom, you know, the finishes. You know, we definitely tried to make a level above of what we saw in the marketplace. You have a queen size bedroom, you know, there's a closet in both the office and the bedroom. There's a closet in the living room area. So you have 3 closets in a unit that might be occupied by 1 or 2 people, maybe 3 if they have a young child. And then obviously the kitchen with, you know, plenty of counter space. And we go to the next slide.
And so, Andrew, just to be clear, these are existing finishes in 100 South 4th, correct?
Yeah, we did a model unit. We're waiting on some final details with MedEd to start closing up all the walls. But, you know, we hope that once we have clearance from them, you know, we'd be finished and every unit would look like this. You know, there are 20 units here within, you know, with the holidays coming up 2 months, maybe a little bit more, you know, sooner if we get kind of that clearance sooner. But yeah, I mean, this is what the average unit will look like there.
And this is what you're proposing then. These finishes would be what you would propose for Central Catholic. Is that right? 1400?
Yeah, I think you would see a similar, if not, I think that certain portions of Central Catholic, it lends itself to what's going to feel like a superior unit just because of the existing construction we're working with. There are certain features that I find to be nicer, but for someone who likes more of a loft look, this might look cooler. But yes, I mean, I think it'll be on par or exceed what you see here. So this is the living area. We could have done a better job where we put the sofa, but I mean, there's room for even a sectional on the back wall. You know, everything's pre-wired for cable, internet, and there's, you know, plenty of room for a nice little living area. And again, with the flex space in the back, you know, when you walk the space, because I don't think there's anything like being in it, you know, we've only had positive responses. And I thought it was a good opportunity, and we had rushed for the prior hearing to finish a unit to have this model to show the board, so we could show an example of our finished work here in the city. But we thought it was important to at least start this conversation with what the finished product's looking like, because I think being able to conceptualize that is important as we kind of dig into something that's just drawn on paper. We go to the next slide.
And as we've talked about, Andrew, pictures are worth 1,000 words, right? So this is your product. This is something you expect to do similar or perhaps even slightly elevated from what you're showing here for our proposed hearing tonight.
Exactly. There are some units that are going to be really special at Central Catholic, especially, in the mansion portion where you have, a grand balcony walking out with a view of the whole city. I mean, you can't, there's not a lot of buildings where you could replicate that kind of feel. So those will be some really special, homes for folks. So there's just some historical photos of the property. We can go to the next slide. We're going to just dig into this. So something I really want to highlight as we get closer to getting into the actual plans, is that we're talking about a building, but we're not talking about, we're talking about something that today is one existing non-conforming structure, but we want to make clear is not one building. And folks who are familiar with Central Catholic High School or may have attended there at various points of time definitely have been the ones that have educated us in those conversations about all the components that comprise the building. So starting with number one, that's the mansion portion. That was the original mansion that you could see in the upper right-hand corner in a postcard that was built by the Luden family, as well as number 7, which was their original carriage house, which you can see the lower left-hand corner to the far right of that first photo. So that was the carriage house. So that space was there's no school in between there. They weren't connected. Those were 1 and 7 were really our first 2 buildings. And the lower right-hand corner is an original rendering of the mansion, not quite as how it was built, but along the, you kind of see some of the details there. And then the middle photo on the bottom is you could see is a rendering of the school building. We go to the next slide. So that's just a closer look. So 1 and 7 are original. And number 2 would be, for folks familiar with the building, the atrium area, which was like their weightlifting gym. Number 3 and number 2, we were told somewhere in there's like a 2.5 or a 3.5 where there's another building as part of these 2 and 3. But number 3 is another classroom portion which helped connect 1, 2, and 4. And then number 4 is the school building. Number 5 is the gym area, is the rear of the gym area, like the connecting piece of the carriage house where you have a stage. That would be like the auditorium area. Number 4 also has the gym on the top floor of the Hill Road side, in addition to classrooms. And number 6 is another connecting component. This isn't in any sort of sequence in terms of when these pieces were built. We have anecdotes on that from various folks we spoke to, but we're not comfortable enough to take a position on when each piece was built. We just know it was 1, 7, definitely then number 4, and then 2, 3, 5, and 6 came, at their own points in time later, creating the structure that you see today. And I think that's really important as we talk about how the layouts were determined here. The thought and care that we put into understanding this history so that we would actually be able to execute on the final product. So we go to the next slide.
And Andrew, while you're talking about that, I mean, again, to reiterate for the board, were you able, despite your best effort, to locate any plans for those various portions of the building?
No, we were not. This is an old, go ahead.
And I'm sorry, not to interrupt you, but in that vein, I'd like you just to explain to the board how you were able to then, and you're maybe going to get to that, but how you were able to survey the interior of those buildings.
We just used, commercially available, LiDAR scanners. The architect in our group were able to image the entire building. So we have what's known as a digital twin for the building. So, it's in the computer, and we have, basically every square inch the computer could see, within 99% plus accuracy of what the interior is. It doesn't show us what's behind the walls, unfortunately, which is what an original set of plans would show us, which, we were fortunate enough to inherit with similar structures of this age and importance, we were able to locate, or we were given when we purchased that buildings, original plans. So we know where the steel is underneath the concrete. We know which walls are definitively load bearing, and that makes our jobs then a lot easier when considering, demolition.
And taking that just one step further, the configuration, the various pieces of construction, the timing as to when those separate portions of the building were constructed. Based on your experience, would you agree with me that that is in fact a very unique condition?
It is a very unique condition. It's a condition that we feel should not be unwound. And if you attempt to perform demolition and create more open spaces and therefore increase the unit density in compliance with the zoning ordinance, you risk compromising the structure itself. And not only is it a cost question, it's, you could make a mistake and very easily create a major problem that may not be feasible or possible to correct.
Please continue with your slide there. I'm sorry.
So this is the zoom in is a different picture, but it's, if you zoomed in, you probably won't be able to do it with the resolution. It's just the mansion and the carriage house. It's an old saddle, like aerial view of the city, but it speaks also to the history and prominence of the building, and kind of highlights what we see as the three main components: the school portion, mansion portion, and then the carriage house portion of the property. And we go the next slide. So just more examples. You see the bottom right should say 7 instead of 3, but you see the mansion portion, you see the carriage house portion, then you see the school portion and the mansion portion. We go to the next slide. So now getting into kind of the layouts. So a lot of the walls that you see, and we prepared multiple sets of plans. One plan, the set of plans that we worked from when designing the units took into account existing walls and proposed new walls, and then also considered, where there would be proposed demolition. I can say that the demolition here, the goal when designing this building was as little demolition as possible, because as you can see from the gray portions of this plan, that's what we can't see, with the scanners that we brought in, which then, correlates to the thickness of the walls. So those walls, obviously you can see from the plans, are quite thick, and, we couldn't really be able to accurately venture, to what is behind them. So our focus has been on making sure that we can complete what we propose without extensive demolition. So on the ground floor level, which has 2 exits immediately to Eckerd Street, so it has its own egress. We have 3 units, one of which would likely end up as like the superintendent on-site, person's unit. And I believe all of these units are compliant with zoning square footage or almost or very close to it. And then what we also have, which I think is very important, is we have the building storage. So we do have some additional storage upstairs. So something that's important to note here is that for any studio apartment that's proposed, we're default assigning one of the larger storage units to that apartment. So without an additional cost, that tenant would be able to have a storage space. Some of them, 50, 60 square feet plus. And, if they do have overflow, if they have their holiday decorations, if they have their travel stuff, there would be a separate place. So while we have a lot of loss, which is the square footage that is in the property, but it's not being converted to rentable space, we're trying to capture that by providing additional storage space for tenants. All of the area in pink, which doesn't really have anything there, that's all additional space that if there's a need, I think we have almost 40 storage units. I'm not sure the right number, but we designed way more than what we normally would. We have obviously a ton of space to add on and provide additional areas for tenants if there is that need. So we don't want to leave that space dormant. We can't, these are either windowless areas or really not usable areas of the building for habitation, but it's areas that we could expand later and give tenants room to have more space in their actual apartment. We can go to the next slide.
Andrew, while you're sliding over to that next slide, the unit mix from a studio standpoint, I think you have 5 studios proposed in the unit mix. Does that sound right?
Yep.
And that number complies with the unit mix numbers required by the ordinance. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it's significantly under
Right.
what the upper end of that would be. And we have one example of a studio, which I think is going to explain kind of one of the common circumstances and why something is labeled then a studio. This is just to give you an idea of what a full set of the plans will look like, because we're going to really look at screenshots of things as we go forward. Just because the plans are the building's quite large, they don't really fit neatly on one set of on one piece of paper. So this is the original, and from here we'll just kind of go into more zoomed in portions. So we go to the next slide. So this is the first floor of the building, you know, the mansion, the school portion. And you know, the right-hand side of your screen is the mansion. The left-hand side is we'll call the school, with kind of ignoring the other components for just the broad overview. So what we also have on this floor is a proposed gym area, which is right in the center of the building, kind of that dark purplish spot in the middle. So that would be a common area, you know, available to tenants. It would be an amenity space, obviously, and something that we feel will also enhance someone's living space outside of their apartments. That's a really beautiful space with, you know, 25, 30-foot high ceilings. It's an atrium. There's a big window on top. It's bright, it's light. And instead of putting an apartment there, we have a common area for, you know, significant common area for tenants in form of a gym. On the lower right-hand corner, we have 2 units that are marked potential amenity spaces. And especially after some of the recent tours, you know, these will likely, you know, these spaces will likely persist in their original form. So we have it here just for this approval process with a unit layout. But ideally, we would retain those. Those are 2 rooms that are in their best condition. It was like the former music ballroom, and then, you know, like a paneled fireplace room with a really beautiful existing fireplace. And we would want to retain those units for you know, another tenant amenity space, and also provide a space for folks with a connection to the school if they had a reunion and they wanted to schedule a time to come back. Something we've done at other buildings and schools that people have a connection to. We never charge for. It's just, you know, part of our obligation as you know, developers to, you know, it's more helpful to give people access to the space they feel a connection to than prohibit it forever. So those would be 2 spaces that I could very strongly say will be maintained in their original form, and ultimately would reduce the unit count further. But for our purposes, they're illustrated as apartments. We can go to the next slide.
And Andrew, just to clarify there, you have had significant interest and feedback, have you not, from alumni and other entities that would like to use that space? Is that fair?
Yeah, I think they could see themselves, you know, having not had access to the building for more than a decade under the former owners. You know, I think that folks we've spoken to definitely appreciate the optionality there. I can tell you in reality, when a project's done, you know, we don't see a lot of visitors, but it's something's unique about Central Catholic, where the affinity that folks have for the school, you know, people feel a very strong connection, the folks that we spoke to, and we want to definitely honor that and make them feel like they're still going to be welcome in a place that they grew up. So yeah, I mean, we've had positive feedback, and it's those interactions that have really pushed us to the position where we want to maintain at least those 2 spaces that also happen to be in the best condition in terms of their original form. So we go to the next slide, which I think is so this is a studio. So this studio is I think a little bit under. So this is 43 square feet under what the zoning requirement would be for a studio, which is 400 square feet. And what I'm trying to do here is kind of illustrate how the building's existing structure creates a situation for us where we really have no option but to design a smaller space to accommodate the existing walls we're dealt with. So if you start on the upper left-hand corner, again, I note the thickness of the walls, because, you know, in certain places they're almost 2 feet thick, if not over 2 feet thick. And it's not something that anyone could you demolish them? Anything is possible. Could you also destroy the building in the process? Absolutely. So for us, when we see a space like this, where when you refer to the photos and ignore the door that's kind of blurred out on your left, you know, you have two rooms. This room was where, you know, according to stories we've heard, Mr. Luden would sit and he would call his car from, and he'd watch the driveway waiting for his chauffeur to bring the car down from the carriage house. So you have this space which we're dealt with, and it's a little bit smaller than what would be required under the zoning code, but our issue is how do you make it bigger? You really can't. So with retaining the historic nature of the property as another consideration, it definitely, you know, pushed us to just design with the existing footprint that we have, given the unique structure that we were dealt with in this building. So, you know, what the room that you see on the lower right-hand corner, you know, easily accommodate bed, a sofa, what we have marked as a closet in the floor plan is really like a space that's like 50, 60 square feet that you could easily be like a nice little office. And, you know, you'd have the kitchen kind of in that hallway area with that one door blocked off with, you know, we'd reopen the existing kind of main entries to those rooms, which are another part of the build, which are another part of that hallway. And then you have the existing bathroom, which we would modify its footprint to just retain the existing bathroom. The tile there is still in good shape. And those are things that we would all try to save in order to retain the original character. This obviously doesn't go into kind of the hardship analysis, but having to demolish this, we could easily, you know, try to demolish this, right? If with, you know, an unlimited bank account, with unlimited resources, with a way to see behind the walls, which we really don't have, you could add 40 square feet to it to make it legal. You could also say it's a non-conforming building, let's pop open a window and add 50 square feet outside. But it's not something that anyone would really do. And I think this illustrates the nature of the hardship that we have here, where we have really an amazing existing structure. It's a little bit off of what normally might be required, but we've designed it to maximize, you know, the space with the structure that we were dealt. And if we go to the next slide. So this unit is kind of a contrary example. So this is in our various drafts, we at one point had this same space that's marked as unit 112 as 2 apartments. It compliant with the construction codes, right? Which all of these units are compliant with construction code, but not compliant with the zoning square footage requirement. In its current form, this unit is significantly over what would be the required, you know, I think 700 square feet for a 2-bedroom apartment. But instead of modifying it to the point where a beautiful original structure that you can see in the photos that we've enclosed is unrecognizable, you know, we kept it. We kept that the beautiful tiled room with the stained glass ceiling is just going to be a super large bedroom. The space to your right is going to have, you know, following the existing window lines, you know, a bathroom and a bedroom, and then the main portion, including the fireplace, will be open. So it's an example of we didn't just engineer this to maximize unit count, is what this is trying to show. We did this to maximize the integrity of the building while maintaining our respect for the historic nature of the structure, and ending up with a unit that an area where we could have easily, compliant with construction codes, illustrated 2 units, but the existing structure compelled us to do 1. So where we could have put more, we put less, for the same reason why we put less in that studio unit that we have. And we spent a lot of time designing the units that typically in a building that would typically have more than 100. And I think that, you know, if you look at the demolition scenario, you know, you would have over 80,000 interior square feet available to you. If you make allowances for, you know, hallways, common areas, what have you, you know, the minimum, you know, square footage for a 1-bedroom is, you know, called 550 square feet, I think. We could be easily have proposed full demolition, not come to the board today for a variance, and presented a design that's fully compliant and have 550 square feet apartments. But, you know, the hardship that brings us before the board today is the reason that we didn't do that. It would be ill-advised, if not almost impossible to successfully do that. We go to the next slide. So this is the carriage house area. So it's just, this is another part of the first floor. This is just showing some additional storage space as well for the building, and then also for tenants. You could see there, this is actually a smaller one bedroom. It's actually one of the smallest one bedrooms we have in the building. And it's, well, actually, no, it's actually 550 square feet on the nose. So it's actually compliant, but we assigned it storage space nevertheless. If you look at the studio unit labeled 124, so that's the example of some of the studios that we have. It's a studio, but it's a studio that's over the zoning requirement by 145 square feet. And it's just, again, it's a very awkward space. So a lot of the lines that you see traced, the dark gray walls or the light gray walls are existing walls. So there's no way we can make a bedroom there. Demolition is not really feasible. So we're left with what's technically considered a studio, but obviously it doesn't look like a studio on paper. And we go to the next slide. So this is the second floor, and I think the second floor is a really good illustration of our desire to comply with zoning requirements where we can. So the middle portion where you see kind of the units going down the middle, kind of towards that section. So that's the gymnasium currently. So that's a big open space. So where we had a big open space where we weren't limited by existing walls and structures, these units are more than fully compliant with the zoning requirements for square footage. We don't need any relief there because we had a blank canvas and we, drew within the lines that the code has. So there was no hardship here to say, hey, we need some sort of consideration. We were controlling where the walls went up, and I think that's really important to highlight when compared against existing kind of units where they might be a little bit smaller. Like the studio that we saw. We can go to the next slide. So this is just the second story of the carriage house. We go to the next slide. And then this is the third floor. Again, the gym, the gym where we're essentially gonna make it 2 stories, because otherwise you'd have 30-foot plus high ceilings, which would be impossible for the tenants to heat and cool, at a cost they could afford. They again, same compliance that I noted before. We can go to the next slide. So this is the proposed parking area. I saw a couple of different numbers on a few of the different reports, and I just wanted to clarify, because the totals we put don't count the 2 spots where we have a tandem, but they are technically additional spots under the applicable codes. We just labeled them as 1 spot. So we have in total, I just counted them up, 96 parking spots, including compact car and motorcycle spots. Our goal, that brings us, I think we're like 10 spots off from being fully compliant with the requirement. This does not include the parking in the driveway on the mansion side. And what we want to say today is, one, there's street parking. We understand that that's not unlimited, and we should not burden the neighborhood with expecting folks to park on the street. We feel, based on data from similar developments, similar to being like Fleetwood Lofts, which project we have under development where the first phase is complete. In Fleetwood, close to Reading, we've seen less than 1.5 spots per tenant. Especially when you have so many studios and 1 bedrooms, although you have less studios and 1 bedrooms here, which is why we introduced kind of the tandem spots where you have a 2-bedroom household with 2 cars. It maximizes the space there. And our goal is to maintain the grounds of obviously the mansion, the school, but if for some reason parking needs far exceeded what we have illustrated here and what the street could accommodate without impacting the neighborhood, obviously there's a lot of additional land that we could develop parking on. We strongly believe that this parking will be sufficient, and if it's not, there are solutions on the other property to house those spots. And it's not in our interest to allow, you know, an issue like that to persist. If tenants need more parking, you know, we'd build it for them. And if we need relief, we'd come back before the board. But as it stands today with 78 units, you know, we feel the 96 spaces, you know, will be more than sufficient with, you know, reasonable on-street parking. And, you know, it's our understanding that the parking authority is continuing to develop, especially closer to the park area, additional parking, which will hopefully offset some of the on-street parking that was there. And, you know, also to note, I think the school at its peak had well over 1,000 students, and faculty members were probably in the dozens. We were never able to find an exact figure, and they had on-street parking, and, you know, the community was able to deal with it before. You know, they had far fewer parking spots than we had now. They had what's limited it to what you see if you drove by the property today, which isn't many. So we go to the next slide.
And Andrew, while you're
Actually,
talking about that, we recognize we're going to have to go through land development planning for that parking, and we understand that and recognize that, correct?
Yes, that cost, I think the application fees alone are almost $15,000. I mean, for us, if we need to define the universe we're working with, which is the unit counts, the unit sizes, and then, you know, we would move forward with the land development plan. And obviously, you know, we wouldn't expect to get a certificate of occupancy without having the appropriate parking spots, you know, developed.
And I would just like to circle back just to clarify and focus on exactly what you've been testifying to with the various floor plans. You have testified that in situations where a unit is dictated by the structure to be bigger, you've made it bigger than is required. Am I right?
Yeah, where we had the space, we did, and we did ask, you know, the parking authority, you know, was you know, took different positions in our other projects, but they were able to look at this project with fresh eyes, and they did, I think, as noted in the beginning of the call, they did write a letter of support for our proposal here, where that previously, you know, we didn't see eye to eye, but they looked at it with fresh eyes and considered the scope of our proposal, which is one of the largest privately funded parking developments in the city in years, and you know, they wrote us a letter of support.
So just to recap on the units, right? The number of units is proposed at 78. Is that correct?
Yep.
Some of the units exceed the minimum requirements. Is that fair?
That is fair.
And some of the units are smaller than what is required by the zoning ordinance. Is that fair?
Yep.
The summary of your testimony is that those unit sizes are not dictated by what you want as much as they are dictated by what is existing and what is constructible. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, there are other ways someone could have drawn this with more or less what units or whatever they could have imagined. But I think we probably had, like I said, maybe 30 iterations in throughout the drafting process of what this building looked like, and we designed it to create living spaces that are could be usable for folks, that respect the existing kind of, you know, structure, and you know, we did it with the existing building in mind. And I think what's important, and when you total everything up, which is something the board has done historically, city council has done support, you know, historically for projects they've supported, when you look at everything in aggregate, so by aggregate I mean adding the total number of units and the total number of square feet inside of those proposed units, we have 78 units and a total area of 49,404 square feet. In aggregate, the zoning code for those 78 units and unit types, being a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, what have you, and their, you know, corresponding unit size, requires 48,600 square feet, which, you know, puts us at, you know, 101.65% compliance with the zoning ordinance on an aggregate basis. And when you include the storage and the amenity space I discussed, not including those two potential amenity units that we plan on making part of the amenity space for the tenants, we're at 107% compliance, not including those spaces. So, you know, in aggregate, you know, especially highlighting where we weren't limited by the structure of the building, we did comply, you know, the best we could and did, where, you know, with the zoning code, and every unit, you know, regardless of how they comport with the zoning code, comports with the building code, which is also adopted by the city. So, which I think is another important point. So that,
And
that's
Andrew,
100
go ahead. I want to focus your testimony here just for a second on the fact that the difference, either positive or negative. So if a unit is bigger than is required, complies, or is smaller than is required by the zoning ordinance, in your vast experience in developing units such as this, are the differences in the square footages what I would characterize as de minimis?
For a substantial portion, yes. For some where we had issues like with Mr. Luden's, depends on what you call de minimis, but overall, yes, our goal was to reduce, any shortfall as much as we can.
And the number of units that are compliant with zoning versus the number of units that are not, would you agree with me that that difference is de minimis too in the scheme of the building?
Yes, especially when you're looking at the aggregate, and especially when you consider, we have probably more than a dozen units that, are 50 square feet short, which is a large closet, which again, we afford to tenants with the storage spaces we have available. And overall, excluding those amenity spaces, we're 100 on an aggregate, we're 101, over 101% compliant with the storage space as proposed, not including all that additional space I highlighted. And the other potentially amenity spaces we're at 107%. So, when you compare that to similar projects that the cities that have been in the city, we're right there with them. And it's when you look at an overall package, given that the building's not cookie cutter.
ahead,
Mr.
dear.
Cook,
Yes, Mr. Rubino.
before we go on, Emily wanted to say something when we were back on parking. So when you've completed what you said, Emily, if you would like to chime in, I think you had something to say about parking, but I'm not sure.
Oh, I mean, I could save I was just saying that I had to stop sharing the screen for a second, but since everyone was talking, I kind of just did it while everyone was speaking. I do have some questions regarding parking, but I can wait until the question portion.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Cook, finish up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to take this opportunity, Mr. Goldsman, to just kind of focus on the two sections of the ordinance 1202, which is the adaptive reuse section. We are asking for a special exception. Is that right?
Yes.
You have submitted site plans, extensive site plans to the city. Is that right?
Yes, we have extensive plans yes.
Your position is that all parking and vehicle access that is provided as shown right now at 1500 Eckerd Avenue is acceptable. Is that right?
Yes, with as I think the parking authority's letter notes, in their support, there's with a slight variance, we expect it to be more than sufficient and are ready to react if it's not.
I do want to point out as well that the zoning board under section B3 has the ability and without getting into variances, has the ability to modify dimensional parking and signage requirements. This is something we've brought up with the board previously in other applications, but it is part of that adaptive reuse. And would you agree with me that that is basically in the ordinance to help to adaptively reuse older buildings such as this and make them functional and usable?
Yes, and we're not aware of at least something in the last decade in size and scope, again, entirely privately funded that in terms of parking at this scale. And that was really in response to a lot of the conversations we've had here with other projects and the focus on parking where the space is available. We're proposing what we believe to be one of the largest private parking developments in the city in recent memory.
I want to add another item here for the board's consideration, and that is under 1101D, which you were referred to by 1202. 1101D kind of dictates the design of the units. Are you familiar with that section?
Yep.
And essentially it requires separate kitchens, toilets, bathing and sleeping arrangements, and bedrooms. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
And you've complied with all of that, am I right?
Yes.
The units that you have designed and the units as they exist will comply with all codes. Is that right?
Yes, obviously subject to final, approval by the building department when we submit for permits.
Final trades, absolutely, everything. So the focus of the units is simply the fact that perhaps they don't all meet the requirement that's in the zoning ordinance, despite the fact that you've added some additional storage spaces and things like that, that they might not have originally contemplated when they came up with those square footages. Is that right?
Exactly. And then in aggregate, which is, again, it is in line with similar projects where we're, you know, over 100% compliant.
All right.
Mr. Cook, is your point that when the zoning ordinance may have been written, most apartment buildings didn't have additional storage for tenants, and that's why this use with this adaptive reuse is in a sense compliant, because when you add the additional storage space, it might put these non-compliant square footages over the required space?
Mr. Price, that is correct. And one additional point that Mr. Goldsman made, which I want to make sure is clear, not only with respect to those storage areas, but also with respect to the total developable area within the building. I want to make sure everybody gets this, because Andrew was essentially pointing to the fact that when you look at what the total square footage required by zoning is, we actually exceed that when you take a look at the unit count. Andrew, can you just touch on that again for the board, please?
Yeah, and there's a chart in the report. From
I was going to ask Emily if she could bring that up for us, please.
Yeah, so when you add up the total area of the units and you add up the minimum required without a variance, the internal square footage exceeds what would be required without a variance in aggregate, again, considering that this is not cookie cutter. Something else that's I also think is important to note is, you know, the internal size of the building is almost 80,000 square feet. We're only showing inside the units, you know, 49,000 square feet. So if we did demolition, right, if we didn't have these hardships, if we were able to demolish and create, you know, clear floor plates, we could put in more units and be compliant with the zoning code. It's just, we have almost 30,000 square feet of loss here, which is quite significant. And again, if there are things we could have done that are risky, that we wouldn't advise someone that potentially could add more unit count, but, you know, given that tremendous amount of space that's not being captured, but, you know, we believe and our professionals believe that, you know, the interior of the building right now necessitates the design that we've proposed.
Emily has now brought up the overall statistics, which are part of, I believe, her modified
there's a top,
staff.
There's a couple of pages before, which might be helpful to see too. Yeah. So those are like unit by unit. So you could see kind of we're off 14 square feet on one, 17 on another, you know, but then 194 on one, which probably gets a default assigned storage unit. Right on the button on more, oversized on some. So, and then you scroll down kind of the bottom and you're able to kind of see as you total up what the column, the third column is the actual unit size. The fourth column is the zoning square footage. And then the last column is the difference. So when you go kind of to the totals, you know, in aggregate, you get that number that we've been talking about, the 101%. So we're in total, so.
Can I add something real quick? Based like, because of the 80,000 square feet of the gross square footage of the building, and we're only having a net usable we're losing like 30,000. A lot of that's because of the hallways and the extra stairs and the redundancy of space that we can't really capture in the units. So that's really important point. If you look at the plans, like some of those hallways are almost 8 feet wide.
And if we demolished, we could capture that space. But
you would go to a 5-foot hallway, and 3 feet of that could all go into the units, and all the units would be, you know, you could put more units plus, or you could just have units be, you know, meet all the requirements.
Thank you, Plato. We'll touch on that just a little bit more with you when we finish up with Andrew, but I think that's a good point here. So Andrew, just to capture this concept, when you look at the overall statistics, right? So your 49,404 is the total square footage of the units you have proposed. Am I right?
Yes.
And the 48,600 is what those units would require based off of compliance with the zoning ordinance. Is that
Yep.
fair?
In aggregate, yep.
In aggregate. So in aggregate, the number of units, the 78 units you are proposing are actually larger in the aggregate than what is required by 101.65%. Is that fair?
Yes, and we just recently, there were some updates made to the staff report because there was, I think, just some measurements that needed updated from the original report where this number did not reflect the, because of the complicated layout that we discussed and the difficulties in actually measuring it. If you printed it out, is actually drawn by Plato's firm on 36 by 48 paper, which is sometimes difficult to get access to in print. So when this was updated, when we caught that, it became clear that we were over compliant, when I think some of the initial reaction that we heard were some concerns, but that we went back, we remeasured everything, Plato's firm remeasured everything, we were able to clarify that we are in aggregate over, compliant here.
Mr. Price, if I could, just a housekeeping question. Will the staff report or I should say the modified staff report in this instance be part of the city's exhibits, or should we mark it and move it as an exhibit?
I'll just mark it, the modified staff report, I guess, was it dated today, Emily, or?
Yes,
It is.
I did the revisions for today and it was sent today.
All right, dated today will be entered as exhibit number 10.
Number 10, thank you. Mr. Goldsman, we left off with the parking drawing. Did you want to go back to that, or did you want to field Emily's questions at the moment?
We could just wrap up because we're right at the end.
Do you want to go through the last couple of
Yeah, so we go to the next slide. So there's just some observations during the daytime. We understand from neighbors that nighttime this does look different, and take that into account. We go to the next slide. Just background on us, and we could essentially skip to the end, and we're done for at least our prepared presentation.
Mr. Goldsman, your knowledge of a building such as this and how to develop it, is that based on your experience working for Heights Advisors in the past?
Yes.
And would you be able to give the board an approximation of about how many units you believe you have been involved in the development of over the last several years?
So as an organization, Heights, we probably conversions alone in Pennsylvania, we're probably approaching over 1,000 units in the last 5 or 6 years.
And would you agree with me that conversions are actually something you specifically focus on at this point, right?
Yes, and we're drawn to buildings like this. It's a weakness and a strength at the same time, because they're often very hard to figure out, which is why they sit. But it's something we get a lot of professional joy from being able to work on.
We talked, I think, about the finishes more than enough. Right? You've basically shown the board what you believe the finishes will be in this building. Anything else you want to touch on there?
Nope. Just I think that in terms of how the finishes relate to the neighborhood, I feel like the building is going to attract folks that really bring this area to life. And considering the dark, dormant kind of building that's there, and we don't want to focus on the negative, and the tremendous amount of kind of criminal activity we've dealt with in terms of vandalism. This is going to enhance by huge margin the neighborhood, bring this type of quality and kind of the quality tenants that'll come with it, and that'll make the neighborhood even greater place.
At this point, do you have anything else to add, Mr. Goldsman?
Nope.
Emily, if you would like to focus on some parking questions, please feel free.
And then I'll be going to the board to see if they have any questions of Mr. Goldsman, and then to the public.
Absolutely.
Okay, I just wanted to say thank you to Andrew. I hadn't been in that building since about 2004 when I was in 8th grade. So it was a little bit of a throwback. And I really appreciate his, he has taken staff comments into consideration, as can be evidenced with the reduction of the non-conforming dwelling units. Questions about the parking. How many did you say again? Could you repeat the number, including those tandem parking spaces?
So I added them up to 96. I thought it was larger, but we keep refining and adding, you know, as we work on the design just to maximize the space. But right now it's 96 from what I just counted up the plans, including the tandem spots. So each tandem spot being 2 parking spaces.
And Emily, I would like to just note here from our standpoint that obviously, as you know, as a plan such as that proceeds through land development, changes are made. So that's our best guess of the proposal at this point in time. Subject
Yeah,
to
we have the submission sets ready to go as soon as we have zoning clearance. Those are complete. They could be filed tomorrow, you know, and they're shared with you guys in the meantime if you wanted to see them.
Okay, no problem. With that number of, let's say, this plan stays as it is of 96 parking spaces. So for those who don't know, and for the board as a refresher, required number of parking spaces 1.5 per dwelling unit. With the proposed parking as it is, it brings it down to 1.2. So they would still be proposing more than 1 parking space per dwelling unit. I would also like to point out to the board, we typically don't, in the zoning ordinance, you cannot have parking spaces that are, you know, stacked on top of each other. However, we do allow stacked parking for single family homes. And so as long as those tandem parking spaces are for one of the dwelling units, so let's just say a parking space is labeled apartment 212. I don't know what the 2 bedrooms are. If that would be considered 1 dwelling unit, and as long as those tandem parking spaces are designated for a specific dwelling unit, that's something for the board to consider.
Yes, and that's something that sorry to interrupt, but that's something that I didn't even mention that I think is important. And like if you drove by Fleetwood, for example, we label every parking spot because we don't want confusion over that. It creates stress. It makes things unnecessarily complicated. So at Fleetwood, we have a large parking area. There's the building's logo, a spot number, and folks get a parking pass you'd see in their windshield. And so yeah, we're you know, what happens between a husband and wife when they have the tandem spots, their business, but I mean, it would go to one household. It would be, you know, one apartment would get a tandem. That's how that would work.
Okay, yeah, so I just want to put that on record. I have seen other apartment complexes where they do the same thing. Also something for the board to consider is when calculating habitable area, we do count closet space. So although us as staff are not permitted to approve dwelling units, including storage space not actually within the unit, it's something to consider that when calculating habitable area, closets are counted in that calculation. That's all I have. Oh, another question. There is the old convent where the parking is being proposed. Are there any plans for that, or maybe something like this in the future?
Our plan is to use that really as our construction office as we're doing the development across the street, and use the first floor for storage, you know, related to the construction. You know, we want to see how the neighborhood and the market reacts before we propose anything there. I think we'd be getting ahead of ourselves. I think that we're lucky to have that space because it's going to be really convenient for what's going to be a complicated project, an area that we could have that's organized and clean and that we could manage everything from. So that's the immediate kind of future for it without any real construction being done or proposed.
Okay, so as of right now, there's no real.
Yeah, we're not.
future use for it. Okay.
Yep.
That is everything that I currently have. And then if you just wanted to maybe elaborate on what exactly is going to be provided as amenities.
Yeah, so in some of our initial meetings with the city about this building, you know, one thing we were asked about is, and we're shared that the city wanted to see more buildings like you see in other cities where you have common amenities, was whether we would do amenity space. So we'll have a gym area, which is in the old weightlifting gym, which is a really cool space and has a really bright and nice atrium. We're going to have those 2 rooms up front, which we have, you know, preliminarily marked as units, but you know, it's our intention to keep those in their original state and restore them. Then you have a storage space, and then, you know, obviously the biggest amenity here is going to be the grounds. You know, we took, you know, we proposed 0 additions to the building. We don't want to touch the footprint. We think that the grounds are beautiful. You see the picture on the screen now, and you find old pictures. I mean, what it looked like was stunning, and we want to bring that back to life and have it as a space for, you know, everyone to enjoy. And I think that's going to be one of the biggest amenities, you know, and really what drove the parking design.
Thank you, that's all I have for right now.
Okay, Emily, could you put everybody back on the screen again, please? Okay, fine. All right, we're going to start with board members. Charlie, do you have any questions at this point of Mr. Goldsman?
Just one. Of course, you mentioned, you know, you're going to be going through land development, and particularly with the parking area, stormwater control is going to be a big item for the planning commission to consider. So can you just touch on how that will be addressed?
Yes, and we could forward the plans along so you guys could take a look, but I mean, we're illustrating, you know, significant detainment on site in order to address what, you know, the data that we've received already regarding the stormwater. So there'll be sufficient detainment on site, and that's what kind of, I think that's might have what won the parking authority over, because it really is a significant undertaking in terms of the investment we're going to make that parking lot a reality. You'll see a parking lot, but what goes underneath and what goes into it is going to be, you know, take a tremendous amount of effort and obviously cost. And we've done all the testing, we've dug all the pits and have done all the groundwater testing, which led us to the determinations that we made in terms of the detainment that we have illustrated on site.
Okay, so you're actually pretty far along in the design.
Yeah, we have submission ready plans, so we could forward those along. We're just waiting on zoning.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Jared, questions?
I was wondering if there were any specifics related to contingency plans for parking if it does become an issue.
Yes,
Could
so
Andrew maybe fill that in a bit?
yeah, so obviously, in addition to kind of talking to the parking authority first and asking for, you know, where they previously we didn't get the warmest responses from them on the other projects. They've always been tough but very fair. We asked for their take on it, and we do feel with some of their plans, especially for the park area in the future, that you know, there would be some street parking that we could reasonably see as part for tenants. But in the event that that is not enough, we don't want, it affects our ability to rent to tenants if there's no parking. So there's obviously, you know, mostly towards the school portion, there is along the alleyway, and then also close to the carriage house areas that could potentially be developed into like head-on pull-in parking. You know, it would come at, you know, additional variances. We wanted to keep this as simple as possible, and, you know, it would require kind of us going beyond the footprint of the structure as it's there now to propose that. So yeah, the plan would be, we have a tremendous amount of land across the street, and would be to utilize some of that area. You know, there's other options we've explored, but, you know, our plan is that if it becomes an issue, it's in our interest, and we will, you know, address it accordingly.
Mr. Bars, have you seen the RPA's letter, which is exhibit number 8? Perhaps Emily can bring that up for us.
1 second.
So just in summary, Mr. Goldsman, on the parking issue, I mean, you've actually gotten, and I don't want to characterize this, but you've gotten an actual more positive response from the parking authority than in the past.
And what we conveyed to them, as we will convey to the board now, is that if there are issues, we will address them. We're not going to leave it for the neighborhood and our residents to figure out. I think you asked how many units we've developed. I think I off the top of my head, I can't recall any significant redevelopment of all those units that we've actually sold. We build and we hold. So we don't want folks associating us with negativity because there's, parking wars. That's not something that's going to be
Negativity, I love it.
So we're, in real time, if there are issues, we would address it. But again, based on our initial take, we feel what's proposed is going to be more than sufficient.
Thank you.
Okay, if we can go back to everybody, please. Okay, let's see. Mr. Harsh, any question? You're muted, Mr. Harsh. You muted yourself again. You muted yourself again.
Okay.
ma'am.
Is it
Your
okay
question?
now? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes. What's your question, Bill?
No questions.
Oh, all right. Tom? You're muted, Tom.
I have no questions.
Okay, Jeff?
My heart skipped a beat when I saw those beautiful stairway. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
My sister graduated from Central back in 1956. By any chance, are you going to be keeping that beautiful staircase?
Absolutely, 100%. They're in the plans.
That is,
no
you might
plans.
know, that was an honor. Only seniors could use those steps. I don't know if you know that. So you'll get a bunch of people coming back. That is really, they're just elegant. I can still remember going up there as a young person seeing it. I didn't realize Emily went there, but boy, if you can keep that, that would be wonderful if you have some events there.
Absolutely, those are not changing.
All right, Mr.
It's almost
Price, any
breathtaking.
questions?
No, I just remember a little housekeeping. I'd like to put in as exhibit number 11, the slide presentation by the applicant.
Okay,
That's all.
fine. All right,
I was
now,
gonna- I was gonna do
anybody
that.
in the audience having any questions? And there's quite a few people in the audience, so we'll try to take you one at a time. Let's start with Marcia. You want to give us your name and where you live or your position? I know who you are.
Marcia Goodman Hinnershitz. I represent District 2 of City Council, so this is within my district. Also to share with you that I'm very familiar with the neighborhood because my family lived in Penn Hill condominiums, so I'm familiar with some of the whole parking, all those things that contribute to some challenges in the neighborhood. I'm not going to speak now to the letter that was sent by council. I believe that it will come later in the agenda. Am I correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So the questions I have, and I'm glad we had a good dialogue about the parking. One of the things that I noted with the parking is you do take account for the residents. Do you take any account for people that might be visiting? Because I am sure, knowing what my experience was when people visited Penn Hill, where they have a challenge with parking too, there was no parking really easily available for people that might want to visit residents that live in the complex.
Yeah, so that's something, I mean, if you guys drove by even Fleetwood, we have visitor parking labeled as well. We make an allocation and adjust accordingly based on what we see in terms of use. There's like I said, there's also the driveway, which might be reconfigured to, comply, if there are folks with special needs that need closer parking, which would be additional parking, if not, moving in and out visitor. But yes, I mean, everything we manage very well. It makes our jobs easier, it makes people's lives easier. And, Fleetwood is an example that's easy to drive to and you could see, and you'd see ample parking, visitor parking, and everything labeled and with tenants with, parking identification in their vehicles.
And when you refer to Fleetwood, you mean the old Fleetwood auto body building?
Yep, right in the middle of the borough. So, where parking was also very, important to them. And, that's how we addressed it.
Councilwoman, if I may, just to be clear, these questions are coming in your individual capacity, is that right?
Yeah, later on I will introduce what's the ordinance or the resolution that was passed by council. But this is as far as my individual concerns. looking at what you very well described, the condition of the building and such, been watching it over the years since Central Catholic left the building, was in the building when the charter school was able to be established, was in the building recently through a tour, was able to see where all the units were going to be situated. And you are accurate as far as you showed the visuals of the studio apartments. My question is, has there been any plan as far as laundry facilities and such? How will
Yep.
that figure into the configuration of all the units?
So that's in the plans already. I mean, it's hard to see on the little screen, but the plans
Okay.
are provided to everyone. There's laundry facilities on every single floor.
So
this
there
would-
will be shared laundry facilities, am I correct?
on
Okay.
every single floor. So,
Okay.
yep.
Okay. And also, the plan, would you be able to follow through with this project without having the studios?
Again, I think the calling of some of the studios is it's a misnomer, like the one example that I showed in the carriage house. There's no other, unless we expand the physical footprint of the building to
Right.
accommodate those units and make them larger. You know, it doesn't make sense to leave them as dead space. So
Right.
we took great care in response to feedback we got to reduce the number of studios. There are only 5 over 78 units, and I believe that most of them are compliant with the square footage requirements that are in the zoning code. It's just it's a subject of the layout that we were dealt. So, you know, I would say that you know, as without reconfiguring everything to try to absorb that space, it would be very difficult to change the plans at this stage.
Okay. And I know through the tour that I took, we also went through some of the units that, and you described this, that we're not going to have windows in the bedrooms. Am I correct about that?
Yeah, so there's some units where there are bedrooms that don't have windows facing outside. So
Okay.
those are interior bedrooms. So in Fleetwood, for example, it was something, one of the biggest questions we got is, you know, there's a freight train next to the building. How do you build apartments and then next to a freight train? And they loved the idea of interior bedrooms because they're like, well, that makes sense, because that's how you combat kind of the noise issues, which we abated other ways as well. Here, it really comes down to the really, and I think people saw it with the plans, and we don't have to pull them back up, but the really deep nature of the building, a lot of the space is not near the windows, but where, and this is illustrated more detailed in the plans when you actually pull them up. There's a transom window everywhere that allows with those bedroom units. So the windows, as you know, in the building are huge. So, you know, they're 7 feet tall. And so you can see the depth there. They're 7 feet tall, you know, in a lot of the areas. So you'll have a 7-foot window, a significant transom window kind of high up, obviously for privacy. So there'll still be natural light in those units and those bedrooms. And then HVAC will be compliant. You know, the construction code has its own requirements on how you bring light and air to a bedroom without a window. But, you know, a significant number, I would say almost every single project we've done in a rehab have bedrooms like this, because it's just the nature of conversions such as these.
And do you know how many of those units would not have, and you were good at specifying, would not have outside windows?
Well, I believe that most that have an interior bedroom, I would say a vast majority also have one with a window. So then it's that person's choice whether or not they want to use it as an office. So at the Public Ledger building, which we referenced at the end of the slideshow, which is right across from Independence Hall, and it's really what is a luxury development. The rents are quite significant for, you know, the park facing units there. You know, the 2-bedroom units most have an interior bedroom. So we have folks in healthcare or you know, what similar to what we might have here, or third shift, which is something we expect to have here, that like the interior bedrooms, but then also you choose to, you know, use it as an office space. But, you know, it hasn't inhibited, even on the luxury side, on the high end of the market, you know, being able to lease the spaces. They're designed in a way, you know, that are really thoughtful and are livable, and, you know, could easily pivot to an office. And again, between the transoms, the light, the HVAC that we bring in, you know, they're very livable spaces.
Okay, and I just have one more question. You spoke about the building that used to be residence for the nuns and that you have no plans for that. I had conversations with city administration that indeed there was a plan being proposed to use that as housing for employees of Giorgio Mushrooms. Is
And
that
that,
something?
that plan was we were told that was not permissible. That's a whole other conversation, but it was essentially rejected. Which is a real shame because I think the employees of Giorgio would be great residents for Reading. I think their individual stories from hiring to the careers they go on to have with that company, which often, number in the decades, is something that's really special. They often go on, they buy homes. I see that as a sad thing that didn't happen. But right, that plan is dead. They made other accommodations, and that's why we currently have no plans for the building and are going to use it for storage for essential pieces of construction, and then office space, which will be very valuable to have.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Okay, if we can go back to the screen where everybody's on, please. All right. Anybody else in the audience have a question of Mr. Goldsman?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Ms. Ulrich? Is that
Sure.
correct?
It's
Okay, you want to give us your name and your address, please?
sure. Michelle Yurek, 176 Clymer Street.
Okay, and what is your question?
So I'm wondering about the land that's at 1500 Eckert Avenue that's going to be used for parking. How large is that piece of land?
I think the area being developed is a shade under an acre.
Oh, 1 acre, okay. And then I also wondered, you had mentioned spaces for motorcycles and compact cars. How many of those would there be?
I think they're out of the 98. I just said I think 6 of them are motorcycle, and then there's a handful of the compact cars. But all that really means is like it'll still fit the average car, but I mean it means like a Toyota Corolla or a Honda Civic. It doesn't mean like a miniature car.
Okay, I think that's all I have right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else questions? Because I'm not coming back.
Hello?
All right. Oh,
Hello?
James, go, yeah, I need your name and your address, sir.
James Wong, 1508 Eckerd. I have a couple questions.
Sir, I'm sorry.
One
Can
is
you spell your last name for me, please?
WONG.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
Is there any elevator in the building?
There's currently no elevator in the building, so all of our ADA compliant units will be on the first floor of the building.
That sounds bad.
We wish there was. If there
How do
was,
you move in and move out then?
people use the stairs. I mean, we've seen that. I mean, we have at Fleetwood, we have car elevators, and we've had people, opt to just move their stuff themselves because they don't want to operate on anyone's schedule. But we don't anticipate that being an issue.
But people who get injuries of the knee or leg, how do they get around?
So we're gonna comply with the unit types that we need to accommodate folks like that. Under state and federal law, on the first floor where everything is accessible, or one third of our units will be.
I mean, seniors don't get around very well, and certainly you're not. None of these are designed to.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to ask if there's a question, please.
Well, yeah, sir, if you can just stick to your questions, all right? If you have something else besides that, I think he answered that really there is no elevator.
There's no elevator and no plan to ever get one.
Right.
How about children and playgrounds?
If there's a question there, Andrew, what's the specific question?
Is there any playroom for them, for instance?
No, but I mean, it's something that I think we often expand amenities at buildings. Like, we did at the Ledger, the community spaces were invested in and expanded on greatly based on tenant feedback. And we have a tremendous amount of space, that 30,000 square feet. If that's something tenants demand, we would, if it's something the people want, it's of course something we respond to and could build. So we have the space to do it if there's a demand for it.
Is there any gym or exercise room?
Yes, a big, beautiful gym in the old weight room for the high school.
Is there a music room?
The music room is one of the units that's going to be, one of the portions that will be retained. That's the old, Ludin music room. I mean, it's not going to be, unfortunately, I don't think there's going to be a demand for that. I think it'll be more like a lounge, but that's what was his music room, originally.
And the other question I have is about sidewalks. The sidewalks are very irregular around that building. Do you plan to redo them?
So when we get to the building department's kind of phase of this, that's something that we're working on now at 100 South 4th Street. The streets department came out, they surveyed, and we're going to restore and replace areas of the sidewalk that, have been, deemed to be something that needs work. So yeah, we're required to, absolutely. Those are, that's something we want to be nice, and it helps kind of make the overall community. So yes, that'll be worked on to make it an acceptable condition.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, Mr. Wegman, want to give your name and address, please?
Thank you. Gary Wegman, 1817 Hessian Road. Couple questions. We get pretty much regarding the parking. If I missed it, what's the code for size of a parking space? Is it 10 by 20 or 9 by 18?
I'm not sure, but that's detailed in the plans that were submitted.
9 by 18, Gary.
9 by 18.
So the drawings show spaces already 9 by 18. So we can't gain any land by reconfiguring that to a smaller size.
Well, I mean, I think compact cars are spaces are smaller, but there are other rules and requirements that we run into.
Understood. I just wondered if it was all 98 were spec'd out at 10 by 20. That was my question. This goes to Mr. Price. Is there a law that restricts the number of adults that can live, or an ordinance that restricts the number of adults that can live in an apartment unit? Is that something that can be applied?
Not under zoning. So it usually in zoning, residential units are based on family units. I believe Reading's zoning ordinance states that no more than 3 unrelated or 2 unrelated adults can live in the same dwelling unit. Really what drives this is market rates and the type of units you have. If you have a family of 15 people and you want to live in a row house, you can live in a row house. But based on what we've seen from this developer, this is going to be more couples and maybe 2 roommates living in a 2-bedroom. It's really not a family type issue.
Okay, thank you. The parking authority.
Sorry, just real quick. Property maintenance does, I believe they have something in their code whenever they do their inspections regarding the amount of people, specifically children, dependent on bedrooms.
But if we have a couple living together, the common wisdom is you'll have 2 cars per that unit.
Dr. Wegman, if there's a question, please.
Coming at you. The parking authority mentioned that the overreach could be possibly use some of the on-street parking, and they thought there were 30 to 40 spaces in the block vicinity around this facility. Was that the Eckerd Avenue spaces, Clymer Street spaces? Is there anything on Hill Road? I don't believe there's parking on Hill Road. Is there parking on Hill Road would be the question.
I would have to defer to the parking authority. I don't want to speak for them, but there is the driveway, which fits a few cars, which I can't answer, but other than that, I'm not aware of street parking on Hill Road.
Okay, so just observation that the existing spaces are already pretty much.
Dr. Wegman, if there's a question, please.
Coming at you. You said guests would park, there'll be spaces allocated for visitor parking. That would be some of those 96 proposed spaces, correct?
It would depend. We also, like I said, have the space in the front of the building that could be configured for some guest or loading, unloading area.
Okay. You didn't show any diagrams of lighting getting from the parking area over to the residential dwelling space. It's kind of dark right now. Is there any plans for how that might be streetscaped?
All I could say is that those are in our plans to the planning, folks, and there's extensive rules and regulations around how much light can leave the space, how much light is in the space, and those plans will be compliant with that based on what our engineers have been tasked to do.
Thank you. Last question. Has there been any dialogue with the owners or through the parking authority? There was a property that burned down adjacent to the lot that you're developing for parking maybe 15 years ago. That's pretty much a vacant lot. Have anybody had any conversation about purchasing that lot for additional parking?
We're aware it exists, and we've stayed very positive tonight, but based on what I'm able to do at this time, I don't have the mandate to acquire additional property in Reading. So, we're aware it exists, and if, those owners were open to some sort of other arrangement, we would consider it, but, it's a shame we're not in a position where we have the resources, but it's a shame we haven't had the experience where we could be more seriously looking at that, because I personally wish we could, but my mandate is you wouldn't allow me to do that now.
Understood. Mr. Rabina, I'd like to make a comment when it gets to that point in time in the future.
You'll have your opportunity to do that, Mr. Wegman, but we got a ways to go. We'll get to you.
Understood. Thank you very much.
We have two people that raised their hand, Mainelli Caraballo and William Vitale. So if Mainelli could unmute themselves, and we'll start with her first.
Minelli Caraballo, 182 Clymer Street. I just have a question because he said about the parking authority serving for the parking, and I just have a question because where we live right now, half of our block is handicapped, and where I end up parking is by Ecker Street. And
Miss Millie, if you have a question, please.
Yep. So my question is, did they serve when they said he said they surveyed? Was it just for the parking lot, or was it the neighborhood as the availability for parking for the neighborhood? Do you know what I'm saying?
It was, I can address that. It was for the neighborhood in general, as I remember reading the letter.
Okay, because there is a lot of, we have a lot of issues. And
Objection, if there's a question, Miss Millie.
All right, yeah, we got to stick with questions, but we do understand what you're saying. A lot of us are familiar with that area.
I think everybody is.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
All right, Mr. Vitale, I believe you had a question. Mr. Vitale, question?
You're on mute.
Yes. You're muted, Bill.
Huh? Okay.
It looks like he's frozen
It's
right
about
now.
it. If I ask the question now, do I forego the opportunity to make comments afterward?
All right.
No, if you ask a question, you can still make comments.
Yeah, you can make
Okay.
a comment later.
So the question.
If we can get a name and an address, please.
You're breaking up, Bill. Can you give us your name and address?
My address is 1242. My name is William Vitale. My address is 1242
Hill Road.
I'm sorry, I
Reading,
didn't. hear that.
Pennsylvania.
1242 Hill Road.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
I think he's frozen again.
Successful. I just have to make a quick statement before I ask the question, so don't jump on me, attorney.
I'll
practiced
reserve judgment on
architecture,
that.
retired about 7 years ago. The best of my recollection.
I'm going to object if there's a
What?
question.
Just ask your question, Bill, and then we can get the rest on
There's
the
a question
record later.
coming.
Okay.
But you have to ask questions now. There's no statements. I'm not trying to be hard, but we got to keep this.
Does the building code, the city can uses the IBC, does the building code permit interior bedrooms in residential units? That's the question.
I mean, I think that's going to be for the.
Andrew, we can defer that to the architect, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's something we defer also just the building and trades, it'd be subject to their final approval. We can't build anything based on these plans, and there's a lot of other requirements that are going to be implicated that they'll also review. They'll review mechanical, electrical, plumbing, all those plans will go into their decision. So that at least my answer is that's going to be the building and trades department's ultimate decision and confirmation of what we've drawn.
Okay. All right. Anybody else, any questions? If not, we're going back to Mr. Cook and then you can proceed. And
Just a comment that it's just a comment that Plato, I guess, got kicked off, so he's connecting again right now.
I didn't understand that.
The architect has been cut off. Mr. Cook, how long do you anticipate direct testimony of the architect?
Based on the extensive testimony of Mr. Goldsman, Mr. Price, I would ask Mr. Plato Marinakos if he agreed with that testimony and if there's anything he'd like to add. There's no point in getting duplicative here tonight.
All right.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I've been having connection issues in my house. I apologize.
Plato,
Yes,
good evening.
good evening.
Would this be the appropriate time to jump in with Mr. Marinakos?
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
go ahead.
All right, Plato. So good evening. Would you state your name and your address for the record, please?
Plato Marinakos, 107 South 2nd Street, Philadelphia, PA 19106.
And Plato, would you agree with the testimony that was provided by Andrew here this evening as it relates to the building and the designs?
Yes, I would.
In fact, the plans that I think have been testified to here this evening, did you participate in the construction or the design of those plans?
Yes, I did.
I'd like to just ask you a couple of quick questions. First of all, is there anything you'd like to add to Mr. Goldsman's testimony?
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, the only thing I wanted to add was just with the adaptive reuse of the with the building. There's some really nice features of the building, and I think we utilize them to the best to our abilities. Plus, we're able to minimize the damage and the extensive demolition to the building, which I think is going to, in the long run, be kind of the memory of Central Catholic, and these buildings breathe new life because that's part of, you know, the continuation of the building, which I think is important, especially preserving that stair and all these other, like the main hallways and stuff like that. Those can easily be converted into units, but you know, it would detract the character and historic value of the building for the community.
So Plato, taking that one step further, when you take a look at the fact that this overall structure is comprised of about 7 different structures, do you believe that to be a unique characteristic of this property and of the building?
Absolutely. I mean, the building was an accretion kind of proposition. You had a very wealthy man building the Beaux-Arts mansion with a huge carriage house with a garden in between. Then that became a school, with a gymnasium. Then another 3 or 4 buildings were added. So over time, a building like that will have like a lot of complications, contradictions, and complexity that you need to address for the new use.
And so when you take that one step further, when you look at the different construction types and you look at the different periods of construction, and you tie all of those different buildings together, I'm sure that complicates everything and makes it that much more difficult to actually design something that's workable in a building like this.
Correct. Yes, it's a very large challenge.
When you take a look at the fact that there were no plans available to you and or to Mr. Goldsman's entity, does that complicate the situation as well?
Yes, because I don't have X-ray vision. We did scan the building, but those take the surfaces and make a model like a point cloud. with LiDAR scanning, but that doesn't go inside to look at what's bearing, what's not bearing. And yeah, it's very difficult at that point.
Moving one step further from that base, when you would look at the potential or the possibility of attempting to demolish or demolition on the inside of the building, would that be complicated, and would that in fact lead to potential issues, not knowing the information that we talked about before?
Yes.
So would that risk be something you would be willing to accept or to sign off of on plans if a demolition was necessary?
Well, we would have a structural engineer have to look at it also, but yeah, it would be very, very complicated, and I wouldn't recommend undertaking it.
Do you believe that Mr. Goldsman and your firm paid attention to as many of the zoning issues as you possibly could, and by doing so, minimize the relief that is requested here tonight?
Yes.
I have no further questions for Mr. Marinakos at this point. Oh, I did want to ask you, I'm sorry, Mr. Vitale was asking about the interior building code, or the interior windows for would the building codes permit interior windows such as Mr. Goldsman testified to?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
So just for the record, the witness has testified in 2 previous hearings and was recognized as an
expert,
less licensed or registered architect in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So
correct.
He'll be recognized for this hearing as the same. But Mr. Vitale, do you have another question that you want to ask the architect, or did that answer your question? Bill?
Well, the rest, I have a lot of questions, but I don't know the specific questions. They're more comments.
Okay.
Thanks, Steve. But I will say that when I practiced interior window, and the question is not whether interior windows are permitted. The question is a bedroom without a window permitted? That's the question. And maybe the Philadelphia still has an independent code, but
do you know the witness? Do you heard the question?
Yeah, I hear that you can have a bedroom with per the building code, International Building Code 2018, the Pennsylvania recognizes. You can have a bedroom with a artificial or mechanical ventilation, but here we have a internal window that has borrowed light from the external window. So we have a transom window. That's
and your
plans that I saw, not every bedroom had a transom window.
Yeah. Well, and I think also when it goes through the final process, those types of issues would definitely be addressed. That would be part of the entire process.
Right.
Mr. Chairman, we have to comply with the building code. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, I agree with that, and we will.
I'll save my comments on all of this for later.
Okay, well, we're going to get to that right now. Is there any more questions for this witness?
Yeah. Does anybody on the board have any questions of Mr. Marinakos?
I believe Susanna had a question earlier for Andrew,
Okay.
maybe.
Ms. Foltz?
Yes, Susanna Foltz, 1716 Holly Road. I believe Mr. Goldsman mentioned the possibility of putting further parking in front of the building. Where exactly would that be?
So there's an existing driveway that could accommodate several cars. There's some additional spots on the school, mansion area that have potential for parking. I mean, this would be something we have to study further. But I mean, there's a significant, I think there's, well over a half acre of undeveloped land on that lot. There's a significant number of spaces we could use. It's just our hesitation at proposing that is just we want to retain as much of that landscape as possible. there are a lot of easy options, but you know, what we proposed at the Eckert Street lot in many ways is more complicated than what some of the things that the mansion side would look like, but it's important to us to maintain that if we can.
So that'll be the front yard portion in the front of the mansion? Is that the?
Yeah, that was one area we thought. There are several others, you know, also go closer to the Eckert Street side and then the alleyway side that we thought had potential to, but we you know, haven't done the planning for that at this time.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna start with Councilwoman Goodman Hinterschnitz, and she can introduce the resolution that City Council put in and make any comments that she wishes as either a councilwoman for that district or as a resident in that district. And then we'll move through the rest of the people who want to make comments. Again, if prior witnesses covered the comments that you want to make, all you have to do is identify yourself, your address, and say, I would have testified as the prior witnesses did. All right, any questions? All right, Councilwoman, we'll hand it over to you.
Okay, and I believe that the zoning hearing board received this correspondence in writing from Council Solicitor Michael Gumbar, but I will read the resolution that was passed by council on September 25th, 2023. The Council of the City of Reading hereby resolves authorizing a member of City Council to attend the special zoning board meeting originally scheduled for October 4th, 2023, provide testimony and written evidence to support the body's position on the application for 78 residential rental units of 1400 Hill Road, formerly Central Catholic High School. Now, I can read into the record the correspondence if that would be appropriate.
Yeah, Councilwoman, before you go forward, though, we need to swear you in.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm here, ready to.
Okay, can we?
Thank you. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Do you affirm that what you just testified to is true and correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, continue, ma'am.
Okay, so I am going to be reading, it will take a minute or so, the correspondence that was sent by City Council to the zoning hearing board. Dear
Mr.
Mr.
Chairman,
Rubino.
we would stipulate that it's part of the record.
Okay.
Okay. We'll put that in then. That's part of the record. All right.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else, Councilwoman?
I just wanted to clarify, because it is part of the record, the thinking of City Council that supported this resolution is that we're looking at density issues within the city. And because of our challenging resources to have sufficient fire, to have sufficient public works, to have sufficient enforcement, that when we start to be able to create smaller and smaller units, it puts a challenge on the city. So we've been consistent as City Council to take positions on this over several years. So I just wanted that to be on record, that this is just a continuation of a concern for how high density can impact the quality of life and the safety of the city.
Thank you. Do you have any questions for Councilwoman? Mr.
I do, Mr. Price. Councilwoman, good evening. It's Mark Cuck. How are you?
Hi, how are you doing?
Good, thanks. So one of the things you just mentioned, I have to take some issue with. You indicated that you've been consistent on this position for the last several years. Wouldn't you agree with me that the city took no position on the medical arts building variance for reduced square footage on the unit size in July?
We did not, no.
Okay, and you are aware that the variances that were requested for the medical arts building consisted of reductions in square footage of units, did you not?
I was aware, yeah.
Okay. When you take a look at the particular issues that you've raised in your letter, you state that City Council assumes that the reason for the reduction in the unit sizes is based on financial position, your financial gain. Is that right? That was one
Yes,
of the
that's what's
statements,
stated in the letter.
but you don't know that for a fact. That's all speculation, isn't it?
A question, was, asked,
It's a
when
yes or
I,
no question, ma'am.
okay.
It's all speculation, isn't it?
Would you repeat that again? Because I want to be able to, give an answer, not a yes or no.
You assumed in your letter, without hearing the testimony back in September, that the reason for the reduced size of the units was based on financial position, didn't you?
That was one of the considerations.
Okay, and that was all an assumption as stated in your letter and therefore speculation, am I right?
I do not agree with the word speculation. I agree with the word assumption was in the letter.
Fair enough. The question then, are you aware of the fact, as specifically stated earlier, that these unit sizes comply with the City of Reading building codes?
I do not believe they do, or else there would not be a need for this hearing.
So I'm going to ask you again, do you know whether or not these units comply with the building codes? And by that, I'm not referring to the zoning code. I'm talking about
Okay,
the
for the building
international
codes.
building codes.
I have requested that the
Ma'am,
from
that's
the
an,
managing
that,
director. Now let me finish, sir, because
it's
you
a
asked
yes
me
or no
you have
question,
to give me an
ma'am.
opportunity to answer.
I-
Okay,
Are
if
you
you don't want me
aware?
to answer, don't ask me a question.
Are you aware that these units comply with the international building code?
I am not aware of these particular units complying or non-complying.
Anything else, Mr. Cook? Mr. Cook?
With respect to your tour of the facility, Councilwoman,
Right.
did you give any thought? What did you think of the building and the conditions when you reviewed when you went through the tour?
Okay, so first of all, and I did speak to this when I went through the tour, I had been through the building before this point, and I saw that there was extensive damage within the building. Most likely, I'm assuming, was water damage. There was ceiling, whatever, all over the place that had dropped down. I was made aware that there was water damage to the building, and that some of that same issue existed in my prior tour, even though I did notice more damage the second time I went through the building.
And so it's your understanding, isn't it, that the developer is going to correct all that and turn this into a viable, usable piece of property? Is that right?
Yeah.
Did you see any large open spaces within that building when you did your tour?
Oh, definitely, definitely. It was a school building, so there were large open spaces, the gymnasium, the weight gymnasium. There was a larger space that was to be converted into, and I can't recall how many units, that was a lab. It's a large building.
And are you familiar with the testimony of the developer here this evening that they are not maximizing the units in this facility?
I heard that testimony.
Who prepared the October 4th letter that you've just moved into the record?
Believe the city solicitor or council solicitor did.
How long did Councilor Ventura have to review that letter after it was prepared?
I can't speak to what Council Ventura had, what time she had to review it.
How long did you have to review that letter?
I believe approximately 15 to 20 minutes. It was given, all council had an opportunity to review the letter before we voted on the resolution.
Your letter indicates that you compared the square footages of the 601 Penn property with that of the 1400 Hill Road property, does it not?
Yes.
What are the square footages of the 601 Penn property, Councilwoman?
I don't have that information at my disposal at this point. You have to recall that when the letter was written, that was done. I did not keep notes on that, but there was a comparison made.
Your testimony here is you don't know what that comparison yields to you.
Not specifically in square footage wise.
Do you know that the average size of the unit at 601 Penn was about 319 square feet versus 633 square feet in this facility?
When you look at averages, I cannot specifically concur with those numbers. Again, I don't have those figures in front of me, so I'm not going to make a commitment either way.
No further questions.
Any members of the board have any questions for Councilwoman?
No.
Doesn't look like it. Any members who have participated before have any questions for the Councilwoman? Seeing none, thank you, Councilwoman Hinterschnitz, and appreciate your participation.
Okay, now, any other citizens have any questions? I know Mr. Wegman does.
Question, sorry.
Yeah.
Before we
No, wait.
continue,
Whoa. This is
Why
not the time. This is the time for statements.
Right.
Okay, so we started with the Councilwoman. Does anybody else want to make a statement? If so, they're gonna have to be sworn in and give their name and address.
I
Okay,
just have a request if we could take a 5 to 10 minute break real quick before we continue with testimony.
Okay, how many people are gonna want to give statements? Raise your hand. How many does that look like? 1,
2,
I
3.
have 4.
4? All right, then we'll take 5 minutes.
I have a question for Marcia. Can we do that before the break or?
All right, well, we already asked that, so if you have a question.
Yeah, I tried to get my hand up, Steve. I apologize. Marcia, has council ever entertained any conversations regarding permit parking in the Eckerd Avenue or Hessian Camp community?
I don't recall that, and again, permit parking is initiated by the residents through petition. I don't recall that there was ever a petition presented for that purpose.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right. So we're gonna take 5 minutes. It's 7:36, so we're gonna reconvene at 7:41.
Thank you.
okay. Okay, we are back on the record again. And we have some people that wish to testify on this matter. Let's see. Let's start with Ms. Foltz first, and I believe you need to be sworn in again and give your name and your address and then your statement, please.
Susanna Foltz, 1716 Holly Road.
Can you raise your hand, please, Ms. Foltz? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
All right. My statement generally is that I'm not opposed to the use of this property as apartments. I oppose the variances for the apartment size and the parking lot, parking space allotments. I live in this community. I see every day that, in my opinion, the parking is oversaturated on Hill Road and Eckerd Road already. And I share Councilwoman Hinterschnitz's concerns about population density. I'm concerned about water runoff. Obviously, this property is on the side of a mountain and water flows down. And we have had problems in the past with stormwater collapse and sewer collapses on Hill Road. I'm also concerned about, the 96 parking spaces or less than 2 per unit. Plus you're talking about having event space. And I'm wondering where those people are going to park or where visitors are going to park. And what I found interesting is that there was testimony by Mr. Goldsman and by Mr. Marinakos that, it is actually possible to have plans where there are less apartments. The problem is it's just a matter of money to change those plans. And they said they could be drawn other ways. They just have chosen not to because of financial concerns. So in my view, they have not demonstrated they have a hardship, and the hardship that they are claiming amounts to their desire to increase profitability or maximize development potential, which does not satisfy the granting of a variance. Needs to be something more than their desire to develop the property as they see fit. And I believe that they could develop this property in a manner consistent with current ordinances. And I believe that they just don't want to for profitability and financial concerns. Thank you.
Do you have any cross of Ms. Foltz?
No, Mr. Price, I do not.
Okay, Mr. Vitale, name, address, and be sworn in, and you're muted.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is William Vitale. My address is 1242 Hill Road. And I
Can you raise
live
your right hand, please? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
So I live in the block below the building, just down the hill. I have a couple of concerns, one of which is the parking, but I won't speak to that since that's been mentioned again and again. But that coupled with a few other things just make me concerned. So I two things to just preface my remarks. I am a retired architect. I had my own business in Reading for 30 years. And during that time, I did a number of adaptive reuse projects, including converting schools to multifamily residential and converting factories to multifamily residential. Factories are kind of a different kettle of fish a little bit, but present some of the same problems. And I too am not here to necessarily speak against the project. It seems to me, and I think Andrew, I agree with Andrew. I think that it may be that housing, other than reusing it as a school, housing is a very good option as an adaptive reuse. I'm not concerned about additional density in the neighborhood. If the other issues can be addressed. We're in a city, it's a dense neighborhood as it is, and I think that it might bring amenities that we don't have in this neighborhood right now. Also, I understand the challenges of dealing with a building of this type, the deep footprint being one of the biggest in a sense, and their commitment to retain the fabric of the building. I applaud that, and that does present challenges when you're trying to work with a building. And as the architect had said, buildings like this have a huge percentage of their footprint. You can't lease it. You can't generate revenue from wide hallways. So those are realities that I appreciate the challenges that they're facing and you know, their attempt to try and deal with this building. But the main concern that I have, and I'm like a dog in a bone, is the interior bedrooms. I think bedrooms with interior windows that bring in light, large windows, help the situation. But the plan that I saw had a number of units with bedrooms with no windows. Basically a closet. I mean, they're big enough to sleep in a bedroom, but and best of my recollection, when I practiced, you could not produce bedrooms like that. Now, it may be that, as the architect has said, that in the 2018 IBC, that in fact is allowed. For me, it's kind of, it's moot. I think that it's a question of quality of life. And I would ask everybody in the zoning hearing board, would you live in an apartment that had a bedroom that didn't have a window? So who do we think, and I'm going to venture that every one of you or most of you would say no. Maybe you would say yes. And maybe I'm way off base on this, but this is what I spent my professional life doing, was designing for people, many multifamily housing and many residential projects, single family housing. Never did anyone say, oh, give me a bedroom without a window. I'd like that. And we struggled to make sure that bedrooms had windows, sizable windows, views, air, light. And so I wonder who who are these units going to be rented to? I'm going to venture a guess that most people, if they have an option, are going to rent units that have windows in their bedrooms. And so is this going to be rented to people that don't have options? And I don't know what that suggests. So I did and also related to that is the issue of the size of the units. Now, what we've heard from Andrew mostly is that, there was a lot of obfuscation. Well, some units don't comply, and there's units that are only 13 square feet short. And when the zoning administrator brought up that list, if you look closely, there were a substantial number of units where the square footage was in 170 square feet short on an overall unit. That's a lot of square footage. So that does make for a more compact unit. And so by my count, I tried to count those in red. It looked like over 50 units were non-compliant. So it's not like, well, a few aren't compliant, most are. The aggregate number was dwelled on an awful lot. In my opinion, that's an irrelevant number. It doesn't matter. If you're in a unit that's small, you don't care if another unit's got twice as much space as the zoning requires. That's irrelevant to you. Your unit's small. So I don't understand what that argument is. It feels to me like that's another sort of sleight of hand or obfuscation. And there are a few other ones I'll come back to in a second that make me suspicious a developer really wants to do and intends to do and plans to do. Well, since I brought it up, another one is this notion that they've had to work with the existing fabric because they can't determine what the structure is. We investigated. Now, if you don't own the building, that is a problem. They own the building. They could investigate. You poke holes in walls, you look at structure, you make some presumptions. You can do a lot of that. I'm not advocating that they start messing with the existing structure, but it's another comment that feels to me like we didn't get the whole story on this. Andrew also said that they did not design to maximize units. Well, when you have units with bedrooms shoved in the interior with no windows, that's maximizing units as far as I'm concerned. To me, it's written all over the plans. And I was on the other side of this, and I was the architect on projects where we maximized units, working with the developer. Can we fit another one on this floor? Let's see how we can do that. So I know that that's the way this process goes. That's not to suggest that there's anything unscrupulous about what's happening, but again, I feel like the zoning hearing board needs to have a fuller sense of what's going on here. We've got a very well-prepared presentation and drawings and a certain perspective articulated that makes it seem like the developers are in the business of saving old buildings. They're not in the business of saving old buildings. An old building happens to be a vehicle of what they're actually in business for, and that's what the previous speaker had spoken to. I think I made my point. I will say that somewhere on the order of 20 to 22, 24 units do have bedrooms with windows. It may be that there needs to be some reworking of portions of the building. Maybe they have to settle for a slightly less lower unit count. Maybe by doing that, the units become more attractive in my mind, and maybe they can charge higher rents. I can't speak to how their numbers compute on the project. I think that pretty much I've taken all of your time, way too much of it, and I appreciate time to speak to this. Thank you.
Bill, good to see you again, obviously. So basically, you're not against the use. You just think a reconfiguration of the units is required for aesthetics and livability.
Yeah, if someone were to say, "Gee, what's Bill's opinion?" That's what I would say. And
You're frozen.
in keeping with the character of the building. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Can you hear me now?
yes.
Okay. I don't know how much you heard, but I think in keeping with the character of the building, I think that, you know, I'm not saying larger units, but units that, overall, again, as I speak to it, overall are attract issue of no windows. I mean, I will say that it's clear there's been a lot of work put into, producing a layout and fitting stuff into a building like that. And I know what it takes. It's a challenge. Anyway,
Any questions for Mr. Vitale?
No questions, Mr. Price. Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Vitale.
Any members of the board have any questions for Mr. Vitale?
I think someone is.
Okay, we have
Is someone asking me a question?
Michelle Ulrich
I'm kidding.
next.
Wait, does anybody in the audience have a question for Mr.?
Yeah, I'm going to Michelle Ulrich. She has a question, and then I think Mr. Wegman does.
She raised her hand for testimony.
Thank you.
You want to give us your name and your address, and you'll be
Hold
sworn in.
on, Phil.
Phil, she doesn't have a question. Or she doesn't.
Oh, okay. I apologize. I saw her hand was up. That's
Does
why.
anybody have a question of Mr. Vitale?
Oh, no.
Okay, I don't see anybody has a question for Mr. Vitale. So the next witness who wants to make a statement is Ms. Ulrich.
Michelle Urich, 176 Clymer Street.
All right, we need to swear you in.
Can you raise your right hand, please?
Yeah.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. I would like to just echo wholeheartedly what Mr. Vitale just said. It was a lot of the same thing that I wanted to say, only much better. So thank you for that. The only other thing I had was about the parking, and I think it's slightly different from maybe what's been said. I wonder about the letter of support from the Reading Parking Authority that said that the overflow of parking would be able to be sustained by our, neighborhood. And we know for a fact, just that that's not true. So I'm just wondering if there's some sort of independent evaluation that could be done to determine what the parking capacity is on these streets. So that maybe, it would be a little bit more scientific or something that would be a little bit, not just what someone thinks is the case, because people who live here know that we don't have enough parking as it is. So, thank you.
Any questions for that resident by anybody?
No, Mr. Price, I would just point out that the RPA is the one that authored that letter and is tasked with parking in the city of Reading. So that's all I would add.
All right, is there anybody else that wants to give testimony?
We have Roxanne Curran.
Okay, well, let's get her up and get her sworn in, please.
I don't think she has a video, but she has audio.
Okay, so swear her in, please.
Okay. Ms. Karen, can you raise your right hand, please?
Yes,
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
yes, I do.
Thank you.
Your name and address, ma'am?
My name is Roxanne Curran and my address is 121A South 11th Street. So I don't know if I'm allowed to comment or not.
I'm going to object, Mr. Price.
Yeah, where's your address? 121?
Well, I am 121A South 11th. I'm about 2.5 blocks from the school and I walk by there every day.
Yeah, you're right off City Park.
Yes, I am.
I think she's close enough. Let her testify.
What I want to say, my big concern is that they say that past behavior is the best predictor of future performance. I have walked by this building over the last 2 years, which is how long this LLC has owned it. And there has been nothing but just complete neglect of the exterior of the building and all of the land, all of the outdoor space. Overgrown trees, weeds, grass, probably 2 feet high. And the only time that the LLC has sent someone and it's crew from New York, they have New York license plates, is to when someone has reported them to codes. And I've seen this twice. In fact, right before the hearing was supposed to occur on the 4th of October, they had a big crew up there mowing. They had let it go for months. And the broken windows that they've been reported so many times. The first gentleman who spoke gave the idea that since they have taken over this, this current LLC has taken over the property, that they've really been, taking care of it. I don't see that. There's a missing gutter on the back of the building. There's trees growing out of the foundation. There's weeds everywhere. None of the beautiful plantings on the property have been maintained. None of them. And there is a porch on the front, which is right outside of what used to be the library. That whole ceiling of the porch is falling in. And it wasn't until about a month and a half ago or 2 months ago that there was a team there. Again, this was the New York team was there with plywood and putting it on all the first level windows. And that again was because there has been calls made to codes. There's just been a rampant neglect of the property. And if these people, the LLC that now owns them, is going to be running this apartment, this building, I don't expect very much. In fact, I'm very fearful of what it's going to be like.
Right. Well, thank you, ma'am. Any questions for this witness?
No, Mr. Price, we're good.
Anybody in the audience have any questions? Okay, seeing none, I guess, Mr. Rabina, that would wrap up the evidentiary portion of this hearing. We'll need to schedule an executive session to discuss this, and we will render a decision at the next regularly scheduled meeting of the Reading Zoning Hearing Board.
Right, which will be November the 8th. And I don't know, if anybody has anything else.
I think Mr. Tucker might want to have a little bit of a closing argument.
I think it would be helpful, Mr. Price and members of the board, just to kind of tie everything together. So,
Mr. Cook, before you go, I had requested to be able to make a statement.
Go
ahead.
Yeah.
Name, address.
It would be appropriate if I went before you, Mr. Cook, if that's okay.
No objection, Dr. Wegman.
Okay, thank you.
We need to swear you in, Dr. Wegman.
Thank you.
And do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
2 quick points I want to make. I agree with all our neighbors that we like the idea of the adaptive use for apartments if it can't be a school. Our concern, or a big concern, is with the parking issue, because as has been stated, it's a big problem throughout our city and in this corner of the city also. 2 things that I think could be done to help mitigate that and get this project done. One would be to consider the concept of permits for all the residents, so that their parking spots in front of their homes aren't stepped on by visitors and other people coming to this facility. My math says that 1.5 unit spaces per unit comes to 117 spaces for 78 units. They're proposing 96 and using some of those for motorcycles and some of those for visitors. So it raises a question whether or not the project won't adversely impact the community. What I would suggest to the owners of the property and to the residents, for all of us around this community, is to contact our parking authority, let them know our feelings that were expressed here tonight, and also ask the parking authority to look into possibly having it purchase the adjacent lot to the lot that's proposed to be developed, and create some public parking for the community at that site, which could alleviate a lot of the on-street hassle and maybe get this project done at the numbers that are being proposed. That's just a suggestion, but that's the parking authority's purview. But they listen to the residents, and I think if we can get Marcia as our representative and all the neighbors on this Zoom meeting tonight to call the parking authority and let them know what you're thinking on this, having them look at that lot. They've done some of these private developments in other communities throughout the city of Reading. I think it is possible that they could get interested in something like this if they can make the numbers work. That's all. Thank you.
I seem to remember you used to be the chairman of the parking authority, didn't you?
Yes, I was about 4 or 5 years ago. So they're responsive to the residents. So, but the squeaky wheel's the one that gets the attention. And if I was the owner of this property, I'd be squeaking loud to them also.
All right. Well, thank you. Any questions for Dr. Wegman?
If I could just make a comment generally and then give it over to Mark. Obviously there are a lot of neighbors. We hear you. We wanted to hear you. We're glad that we had our own hearing, so we had time for this. I've had a limited number of interactions with Bill. I've had a lot more with Fred, who's a neighbor of Bill, who's right next to us. I think if you ask Fred or Bill, I think one thing they'll definitely agree with is we've been pretty open and transparent with them on their questions and concerns, and to the extent folks feel like we're not hearing them, it's not because that's our intent. It's actually the opposite. And Fred and Bill know how to get in touch with us. Zoning department, we'll make our contact information available. These are conversations you want to have. We're open to having them. That's really our position. So, I think some of the things that I heard folks say are not accurate, and we would appreciate the opportunity to correct those perceptions. If folks want to spend some time with us. So that's all I wanted to say.
All right.
Okay, Mr.
Drew.
Clark.
Go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I just would have a couple of quick comments to tie everything together for the board and for Mr. Price. Andrew, I just wanted to ask you one other item here. I think you were still making perhaps tours available on a limited basis if somebody wanted to see the property. Is that still something we were doing or not?
Yeah, folks wanted to meet with us and discuss. We're super open to doing that.
So I would
come to visit obviously 100 South 4th Street, which has a completed unit.
And so I would start by saying, number one, ladies and gentlemen, I appear in front of you pretty often, and I want to apologize for the length of time for this hearing, but I think it was warranted, and I appreciate a special time frame because of the amount of information that was presented to you. First and foremost, I do want to take issue with what my colleague Susanna Foltz indicated about hardship and what she classified or characterized the testimony of Mr. Marinakos and Mr. Goltzman. That was clearly her opinion and her opinion only. That's not what they testified to. So members of the board, when you go back and take a look at the testimony, I think you'll be pretty clear as far as the analysis that has gone into this project, and it is not solely financially based. So that being said, again, ladies and gentlemen, we are here for a special exception. Okay, this is an adaptive reuse. You members of the board hear these arguments every month over and over and over again. You have heard testimony from my clients on numerous occasions, and I do believe that it is important just to point out that under a special exception, the rules and the parameters of how that works. Specifically, again, I will point out to you what I typically do, that under the adaptive reuse, under paragraph 3, the zoning hearing board, as part of the special exception approval, may grant reasonable modifications to dimensional parking and sign requirements that are necessary to allow reasonable reuse of the building without needing proof of hardship. So my first argument is we're talking about an adaptive reuse. And as you gentlemen have heard, the proposal of my clients is to make an extensive reuse of this property. We do hear the concerns of the local residents. As Andrew mentioned, he is not going to turn a deaf ear to those. We are open. We are available. We, in fact, have approached City Council I've sat in front of Councilwoman Interschitz and her entire board and made myself available to attempt to answer questions or to be available for whatever they wanted to know, and that's fallen on deaf ears. So that being said, the second thought process, the second argument here, if in fact you reach the conclusion that variances are necessary, they're only necessary from that 1104 section 1101D. We have given you substantial evidence to indicate that the sizes of the units are related to structure, design, factors beyond our control. We believe those are dimensional and de minimis variances, ladies and gentlemen. We believe the evidence will show you that they're dimensional and de minimis. You're familiar with the Hertzberg line of cases, I'm sure. I can recite that, but I don't think Mr. Price needs it. Again, the sizes of the units also include and deal with storage facilities. So there are additional considerations here, and I do believe our clients have maximized the actual usage of those units to the point where they are what is required by the design of the building, the existing conditions. So a lot of thought and effort has gone into this. I know you gentlemen realize that, and you've listened attentively. So again, dimensional and de minimis variances are the focus. I do not believe you have to get to a hardship whatsoever in this analysis. And even if you do believe that, I think you have, in fact, been presented with more than enough information to that point. So, gentlemen, ladies, again, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Okay, I just have one comment that I would like to make. First of all, I want to thank everybody tonight who participated, whether you agreed with each other or not. I think everybody did a great job, and we appreciate that. This is really an important project to our city, and I think I have no idea what we're going to decide at this point, but we will make every effort to try to make the best decision possible. Now, Mr. Price?
Nothing. I'll just have my secretary coordinate the executive session. And I'll follow up with a phone call to you, Mr. Chairman, tomorrow.
Okay, and just to all of you, we will make our decision at the November 8th meeting, which is our next scheduled meeting. And again, we didn't mind the time, Mr. Cook. We think this was important and are willing to devote that to it. So see you all on November the 8th, and we thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate your time.
Take care.
Good night, all.
Good night.